Welcome to another episode of the BS Podcast, the show that looks at how behavioural change insights are being applied in the wild. Episodes feature renowned behavioural experts across industries and organisations, from management and marketing to policy and public health, and more. Let's dive in and see what all the BS is about. Here's your host from The Behaviourist, Nick Hobson.
Hello, BS listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the BS Podcast. And today's show is, following last week's, another special one, which is a little outside the ordinary for us. So instead, today of one behavioral expert, we have, how many? 1, 2, 4. And well, I guess in the words of Thurber, 4 is a party, and I love parties, so I figured it's better to have 4 than just one. So why are we here? As listeners of the show, you've heard me and mostly my very intelligent and expert guests talk at length about the state of the field of behavioral science. And in past episodes, we've wrestled with all sorts of different questions. Who are we as a field? What do we call ourselves? Are we just a bunch of BSers? Is the next revolution in business behavioral or psychological? Is that overly ambitious? Are we really that special? And lastly, where do we go from here now that we've made some moves? What does that mean for the coming decade and decades? And so flirting with these sort of philosophical questions like these, I think it's critical for the enduring success of applied behavioral science. So I believe, as do many of my colleagues and the guests I have on here today, that we kind of have to figure it out now, sooner rather than later. And that brings us to today's very special episode. And why I have here my lovely party of 4. So with these esteemed colleagues, I want to introduce you, dear listeners, to officially the Global Association for Applied Behavioral Science, or GAABS. And to discuss GAABS with us, I have my fellow founding partners, Steve Martin of Influence at Work, Torben Emmerling of Affective Advisory, Nuala Walsh of Mind Equity, and Pelle Hansen, behavioral scientist at Roskilde University and director of the Initiative of Science, Society, and Policy. So party of 4, welcome to the show.
Hi.
And congratulations, to us, to you for all the work and to the official launch of GAABS. I know it's been a long time coming. Steve, how does it feel?
I'm really pleased, and I'm really impressed at the large number of people that have been involved in this initiative that's been ongoing now for well over a year now, actually, when we first sat down one of the alumni events at the LSE and kind of decided that this would be a good idea to pursue. And so, I'm absolutely delighted, not only that we've launched this thing, but the incredibly large number of people that have supported us and that are all lined up and joining in vast numbers. So absolutely delighted.
Excellent. So with that, we're gonna dive in. We're gonna sort of take this conversation all sorts of different directions, but really the point of today's show and today's discussion is to get a sense of what GAABS is, why we're doing it, and what we want it to be, and why we're so excited about it. So I figure maybe as a starter, and this is something that we've discussed on the show previous, but how did we get here as a field of applied behavioral scientists or behavioral practitioners? It is, I think, this sort of interesting history of the blending of academia and business and policy. So again, to you, Steve, and I promise the others will talk. It's not just the Steve show. But for you, Steve, how did we get here? What's the last 15 years? What's happened in our field?
Well, it's a really broad question you asked there, Nick. And, I'd go back a lot further than just 15 years. One could make the argument that, since the dawn of time, people have been interested in influencing and persuading and changing the behavior of others. It's just in these last few years, we've gotten pretty good at understanding what the most robust and reliable effects are that enable us to actually do that. But I come from a school of thought that probably goes back some 70, 75 years now to the early work of researchers like Kurt Lewin, and then in the 50s and 60s, researchers like Leon Festinger, Elliot Aronson, even Vance Packard, the Hidden Persuaders. That book is 63 years old now. So I think that really does speak to the vast history that our field actually has. And then, in the 70s, when Kahneman and Tversky began their groundbreaking work on decision making and judgment, Bob Cialdini's seminal work on social influence theory in the 80s, there's a long history to applied insights from behavioral science. I think it's just in the recent times that we've formalized and called it behavioral science. And I suspect for the more contemporary behavioral scientists and applied practitioners amongst us, they I don't think it's a surprise that the financial crisis of 2007, 2008 was one of the pivotal moments that got us to where we are now, where organizations, governments, not-for-profits were in a situation where they're thinking, well, we need to get our message heard, we need to affect change in our society and our organizations, but we don't necessarily have the traditional economic resources, and some of the best practices were starting to perhaps be questioned. And so I think that really was a turning point in terms of our field's popularity. And then Thaler and Sunstein brought out Nudge, Danny's Thinking Fast and Slow. Some of the well popularized books now became part of the mainstream, and now we are where we are, where we seem to have an extraordinarily large global audience that are interested in this field and interested in applying it, and therefore some community or group that has a set of shared values and interests to represent those applied insights, particularly in the private sector. I think now is our time.
Hear, hear. Yeah, I agree. And so let's dive in a little bit. What is GAABS? To start, just at a high level, how does it operate? What are we looking to do with it? So Nuala, I'll put that over to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose the first thing to point out about what is GAABS is the fact that it is the world's first member-based association, and it's the main point is really that it's serving the interests of applied practitioners. And I think, as Steve has said, the field is growing, it's exploding in popularity, but the gap exists. And I think the gap exists mainly on the practitioner side. At the end of the day, no professional or regulated body exists to manage this. And I think we've seen in financial services and other industries, when that gap exists, there's a real risk of unethical applications, and that has a massive implication for clients and society at large. And I suppose I see GAABS, one of the main reasons as to why it's going to add value is the fact that it's almost the yin to the yang. Behavioral science is, the opposite for data science. And we've seen in the last number of years the explosion of data science. And data science and big data needs the other side, and that is behavioral science. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons that explains its popularity, that Steve was referencing. So another factor driving this and helping this is GAABS is going to future-proof this field. There's a real danger of the blurring lines between what is the field, the academia, the scientific applications, and how people actually apply that in practice. I mean, the principles applied to in a marketing campaign or HR recruitment is very different to the actual scientific, robust underpin that this has. The word science isn't there for nothing. It's a very strong field, and I think the danger is that people get seduced by the stories of human behavior, their interests that people have, the quick wins, the easy nudges. It feels much more easy and intuitive and simple than it is in practice, and that's why we need this field to bring it forward. So overall, GAABS is going to add legitimacy to the field. Once upon a time, fintech was unestablished. This is our time, I think, as Steve says.
Torben, something to comment there?
Yeah, I'd like to add to Nula's wonderful comment that GABS is an innovation in itself. It's a partnership of independent practitioners, leading organizations, leading academics in the field of behavioral science that all came together to form this world's first global nonprofit and member-based association. It's been created over the past, 12, 14 months in collaboration all across the world. So we had people contributing to this from different countries in Europe, from the US, Canada, Asia, Middle East. And we really think it's the first time ever practitioners and academics did pro bono work in such a resort and in such an effort to establish a completely independent body that's here for people that are serious about applying behavioral science in practice. And it's actually bridging all these people and bringing all these smart ideas and techniques and ethical correct ways of ethical conduct together. And this is what we're really excited about.
Yeah, excellent. And just to circle back on some of the comments you guys made, Nuala, you mentioned this, and this has come up in past episodes, namely with Dilip Soman of Rotman. He made this interesting distinction, as others have as well, between data versus evidence. So in some sense, the data science field sort of precipitated the behavioral science, and we're now seeing these two worlds collide and come together for the biggest impact and delivery of these different practical solutions in business and policy. But data in itself is not all that relevant, not all that interesting. You need data to be translated into evidence, and evidence, means it's sort of coming from a theoretical rationale, and that's where you have the wealth and of research findings of the last century of social psychology and or behavioral science, like some of those big names that Steve, you mentioned at the outset of our chat here. So that stands out to me, and related to that is, I think we've always grappled with this stereotype. We call ourselves just that. We call ourselves behavioral scientists. Yeah, we are, and we want to be scientists. We're not philosophers. We're not anthropologists. We're not sociologists. We are scientists of human behavior. But this is something that psychologists and behavioral scientists in academia have been struggling with for a century. This, what I've heard before, labeled as physics envy. The physicists and the biologists and the chemists, these are the real scientists. We, psychologists and behavioral scientists, some people still believe this, that we shouldn't actually be in this world at all. It should, these sorts of questions we're asking and the sorts of interventions that we're designing to change people's behaviors should be a sort of a philosophical exercise and not a scientific one. I don't agree with that, and I suspect you guys don't either. But it's just something that I think, as we make this leap into industry and as we begin to set up GAABS, these are the sort of stereotypes that we have to combat against. And I think it's important to have GAABS, in our arsenal to help with that. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And as you rightly say, one of the challenges, and let's think about, I can speak from the field of social psychology. Principally, that's my kind of area of interest and training. And to a lot of people, social psychology is a lot of obvious, inane kind of factors that, well, my grandmother could have told you that. And that's essentially what we're dealing with here often, is this, it seems intuitive, and therefore, why would you want to train in it, undertake formal instruction, learn where it applies and in what context it's most useful, and where in others actually it can completely backfire and create some unintended consequences. You're exactly right. Unlike economics or engineering or medicine or plumbing, even that requires a level of outside training and input and expertise, a lot of people feel that they've got an inherent understanding of psychology because they're human and they've lived life. The problem, of course, with that is, when it comes to its application, it starts to create problems in the marketplace. I don't think there's many people around that would be willing to allow a plumber, for example, to come in and install central heating in their home whose only qualification is that he saw a short video on YouTube or, read a popular book about how to do plumbing. No one would accept that as a standard in the industry of plumbing or medicine or law or economics. But it seems that there are a lot of people that are willing to accept that standard in the behavioral and psychological sciences. And this is what we're trying to essentially accomplish, in this endeavor with GAABS, is to have that standard and to recognize that there are scientific insights, there are important rules and principles that can be applied, and only those people that really have taken perhaps the time and effort to be trained or acquire some industry experience, we should just recognize that experience, that intellect that they actually have, and create some sort of differentiation from perhaps those that have simply read Nudge and think now that they are well equipped to go out into the world and apply behavioral science to whoever wants to write a check for it.
Now, what if they've maybe they haven't read Nudge, but they've listened to a podcast, maybe a few episodes of a podcast.
What if it's yours, of course, Nick? Then
well, obviously, yes. And Nuala.
I'd add one thing. I think you touched on, you made a very good point, Nick, and Steve followed up, that your point about the stereotypes. If you go into many of these, and given that we're targeting the private sector, if you like, the private sector has its own stereotypes and its own biases, and it makes behavioral science a very difficult area to sell, if you like. And the problem is that you want to sell to people something that they don't think they need. It's like insurance, and because there is this over focus of IQ, not EQ, in all of the data-driven industries, whether it's banking, insurance, science, pharmaceuticals, whatever. We have a real responsibility, I think, to create this need and awareness within not just the membership base, but also within their clients in terms of what they really need. So many decisions. I mean, there are libraries written about the derailers, decision derailers that people have made from all the different biases. So I think that GAABS, in a future state, being able to meet that need, that I suppose underappreciated need, at C-suite level, is absolutely critical, because people don't know what they don't know, and it's a hard thing to sell. But I think maybe that's something that within the membership base that we can try and make a real difference with.
That's great. And Pelle, the quiet academic on the show here, I'm going to put the next question over to you. Why I'm excited by GAABS for a number of different reasons, but one I think is, and I mentioned this earlier, it's sort of the promise of bringing together what has been seen as these two disparate worlds of academia and industry. And I know that's changing, but I think there's more change that needs to happen. So just for instance, when I was in graduate school not too long ago, 5-7 years ago, my mentors and that whole culture that I was steeped in within academia and graduate training, there was next to no understanding of doing applied behavioral science. There was absolutely no mention of it, no training. So when I made the leap out of the academy, it was just a totally new world to me. So I still think there's a lot of work to be done. But the question I have for you is, why is there this divide between the two worlds? And to follow up, what can we do about it to lessen that divide?
Well, I think when you look at how university works, it's you have to do your publications and you have to train your graduate students and stuff like that. And that's the basic interest of a lot of academics. And as I usually also say, that academia is a place for special people, right? So they might not be that fluent in the real world. And for that reason, academics are often not that interested in the real world. I think Baumeister wrote a beautiful article at one point about the state of psychology having become a science of mouse clicks and self-reports, which is strange because it should be about behavior. And I think a lot of people in academia are just interested in in the publication side and the funding side. So like I'm from this university where we have to work with real world problems. So 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I became more and more entangled in studying human behavior for serious. And since I was what I think is studying normal people's behavior, you couldn't sit at the university doing that because there are not very many normal people at the university. So I just left the office. I don't think I've been there since that. And travel the real world, and it's a very different place than what you think the world is in academia, right? And the other day I had this time travel back. I had a meeting with some researchers, and we were about to plan some experience on how to get school kids to consume fruit and vegetables and drink water during the school day, and everything was going nice. And then I said at one point, so it's going to be so exciting because I really believe in these experiments, and if we get them, it's about rolling them out in public schools. And it was just silence. And then one of the researchers said, so are you saying that if this works, then we are actually going to apply it? We're actually expecting that we will do this in the real world afterwards, because I was thinking like we are going to do a couple of publications. And then almost all of the people at the meeting, they just withdrew from the project because they found out that this was actually about to be about implementing stuff and changing stuff. So there are other interests in academia. And I also experienced when I landed in this, when I started up the INRQ Applied Behavioural Science group in 10, I found out that consultancy works on completely different terms that academia do. So if you want to get things out flying in the real world, you also need to adapt to the terms and conditions that apply there. And then also I had experiences of consultancy working by other standards than in academia. I experienced at one point a person sent me a videotape from a conference where there was a person on stage presenting my experiments, saying that she did it, which is in academia, the first ticket out of academia. But in consultancy, it's completely, for some people, valid to claim other people's work. So there is a divide, and I think it's a divide in interests and also success criteria and the conditions you work under, and that's the main divide.
So I've had a similar experience to you, Pele, but as a consultant, and I recognise a lot of the and really do have a lot of sympathy and empathy for my academic colleagues who have this publish or perish kind of mentality drilled into them, and that publicity, I think, is the really important thing. If you're going to put your name to work that anyone can access, then it really needs to be solid, it needs to be correct, it needs to be right. Whereas in the business world, in consultancy, you don't necessarily have to be right, you just need to be effective today. And that sets an entirely different context. But this idea of claiming work and probably not plagiarism in that instance, but saying, well, there's a good idea and that was mine. Success has many fathers in consultancy. And I've had a similar experience. I remember a few years ago, someone called me, asked me to go and speak at a conference about a book that Bob, Noah, and I had written together. And they wanted me to go and speak. And then the subject got round to how much that would actually cost and the budgets. And then they turned around and said, well, it's interesting because we're also talking to someone else who's read your book and is very familiar with it. And they're able to deliver a similar talk for significantly less. So I think we're going to go with that person in that instance. So whilst I recognize the frustrations of that, the outside world, outside of academia, claiming to have ownership and responsibility for the work that you have created and developed. The same thing happens in our own. We eat our own as well, which is unfortunate, I guess.
So it seems like there's obviously strengths and weaknesses to both of these fields. And one thing, Pelle, that you mentioned that I think the applied side of behavioral science can solve for is with the replicability or the replication crisis that psychology continues to struggle with and grapple with. So back in 2012, when I started my graduate training, That was the sort of the start. The floodgates have opened with a number of dodgy papers that had been published, and I think that the academy is still struggling with the backlash of the failed replications of mostly within social psychology. And I do believe that one way around that is to start to do research in the real world and to give a shit about understanding human behavior as it happens, quote unquote, in the wild, and not with your what's been labeled the weird samples of psychology. Weird, of course, standing for what is it? White, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, i.e., your 18 to 20-year-old students of Ivy League university institutions. Human behavior is so much more than that, and I think the applied side of what we're doing and what GABS is really representing and standing for can get us out of the dodgy side of the science. And that's the ironic part for me, is that a lot of academics, I'm not sort of, I don't pretend to be generalizing here, but some academics, many of whom I know, had this, they kind of held their nose up to those who sold out and went into industry because that wasn't real science. And then here we are, we're actually seeing that they're not doing a great job of it themselves. So I think the way moving forward is partnering and working together to sort of figure out the mystery of human behavior. So let's get less philosophical here and let's get a little bit more practical. Torben, what's the importance of having GABS right now? And I know we sort of alluded to it, but let's talk more about this idea of maintaining the reputational integrity for behavioral practitioners, and what can GABS do to ensure that happens?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of points, and as you said, some of them we touched upon before. The first one, I believe, is reputational integrity as a science, and reputational integrity for us as practitioners and teams working in this science and in applying the science in practice. So, as we said before, today an applied behavioral scientist is not a protected label or a protected profession. Literally, anybody who's read Nudge, Thinking Fast and Slow, other popular book, could call themselves a behavioral scientist. And with GABS, we're not actually distinguishing who is a good professional behavioral scientist and who isn't, but we are creating a quality kite mark for all these people who want to be part of this member-based association and who would like to call themselves and affiliate themselves with GABS as a body for professionally qualified behavioral scientists. So number one, it's this reputational quality kite mark we are creating, setting up a network of professionals who are able to exchange with each other, learn from each other, conduct research with each other, and then disseminate the learnings across the whole society of applied behavioral scientists. The second is for sure what you just mentioned before, is connecting academia and practice. We see that a lot of academics are interested in conducting field experiments, and a lot of practitioners are interested in getting advice from academics. And the link between is something we're trying to make with GABS as well. And then overall, we hope that the conversation in the forum of GABS stimulates the overall professionalization of the field. So we know behavioral science is a fascinating field that has many followers, many aficionados, as we'd say. It's a science that everybody can recall an experiment from, and that is really good to throw in insights from at dinner parties as well as in consultancy projects in major organizations. However, the science has so far struggled with a consistent and stringent deliverable of these insights from academia into practice, and to creating frameworks, guidelines, sets of insights that are shippable into organizations, both in the public and in the private field. And so with GABS, we would like to take this forward and create a forum and platform, as I said, to stimulate this conversation going forward.
And one thing, and others feel free to jump in, but what I really like about GABS and the conversations we've been having together as a group, but with other early members and partners out there, is that behavioral science consulting and for profit, we seem like we're a good bunch, and I mean that might be just like my bias and like the people I'm talking to. But there is this spirit of inclusivity, and there is this spirit that all boats will rise with the tide. We're not out there to, and Bella, I know you mentioned earlier, like the sort of the how consulting works, but my hope is for behavioral science consulting, like our little version of it, that it continues to operate in the ethic and in the spirit of scientific openness and collaboration. And I know we have to sort of temper that with the realities of doing business and commercializing our products and our offerings. But for what it feels like from my side, and just the conversations and the guests I've had on the show now, upwards of 60 leading figures in behavioral science, is we're wanting success for everyone. And as Christian Hunt has put it, there's a shitload of work out there for everyone. There's no shortage of solving for behavioral problems, and so I think we sort of should keep that in mind, and that's why I really like GAABS. And I don't know if you guys intended to do that, but if you did, kudos for sort of keeping that spirit alive within GAABS.
Well, we might claim down the line that was our plan all along, but it would probably be not true. It is that I think we were lucky in terms of our timing. We were fortunate in terms of having this extraordinarily motivated and energetic alumni principally at the LSE, but now as other groups are joining us who wanted to all collaborate to build GAABS. But I think you're right, and Christian is exactly right. The early stage of the market that we're actually in demands that we be collaborative, demands that we share, because there are so many opportunities out there, and there are so very few behavioral scientists. And I think that's worth reminding behavioral scientists of that fact. We're in these forums where it's largely an echo chamber. We're talking to other behavioral scientists, whether they are pure out and out academics or whether they're applied behavioral scientists. And it's very easy in that environment, I think, to come to the conclusion that everyone in the world is a behavioral scientist. But our community is relatively small. There's a big wide world out there. And I think as the doors open and we start to, one of the things that I've noticed these last couple of years is it's become a little easier to sell field experiments than perhaps it has done in recent years. And that, by default, will open up opportunities because people that perhaps haven't really thought about how they might measure marketing campaigns or change programs in their organizations, which, by the way, they spend millions and millions and millions on, that opens up a whole world of opportunity for us. And so that demands that we be collaborative and that we share our work in the early stages. I think we're a long way. It will come at some point, but I think we're a long way from the dog-eat-dog world of competition as far as applied behavioral science is concerned. It will certainly come in the future, but for now, I think it's our responsibility to be open, to share, and to, and I use this word advisedly, exploit the opportunities that are out there. There's lots of people that are coming to us that are interested in our insights, and that's got to be good news for practitioners and academics alike, because there's nothing more, I think, enlightening than bringing academics into those real world environments and using their stringent scientific models and approaches to help measure and apply these insights.
I'd probably echo that, Steve. I'm not sure. I would say that the laws of competition apply as much to practitioners, I guess, as it does to any other industry. I suppose at the end of the day, I think where we're all very positively motivated, we're also irrationally motivated, and behavioral scientists are as human, as accountants, builders, or lawyers. And I think that's why the importance of GAABS, stands on the very fact that people are still going to be, you mentioned it early on, driven by, the need for publicity, power and prestige. I see the same politics, and coming from 30 years in business, I see the same politics in academia, as I might see in business. And I think because of that, we hear about all of the unethical elements of misconduct in business, from the Volkswagen emissions to LIBOR submissions. You don't hear about it as much in behavioural science because it's new, because it's emerging, and maybe it's just early days, and that's why. I mean, probably the most famous one, of course, is the Stanford prison experiment. We all heard about that. Is that behavioural science? Is it psychology? Is a moot point. But now, because of the popularity that we were talking about earlier, I think it's absolutely critical that we have this ethical code of conduct in place, and we have a mutual responsibility, not just to the field, but to society as well.
No, I recognise this competition, Nuala. In this in group, if you like. I was just merely pointing to the larger size of the opportunity out there. I was reminded. Bob said something. Bob, this is Bob Cialdini. So influence now is sold probably as much, if not more, than any other standard text in behavioural science. And he was once asked this question: well, aren't you concerned now that because your books have sold so many millions of copies, that everyone will know all about behavioural science and they'll be able to defend themselves against these insights and use them themselves? And Bob pointed out that the number of books he's actually sold as a comparison to the population of the world is just absolutely minute. And so I was speaking more about the size of the broader opportunity. The only people that are commissioning behavioural science at this moment in time are those people that are probably interested in behavioural science and that have some either affinity or connection to it. There's a huge world out there of people that will need behavioural science insights. They probably just haven't quite caught up and recognized that they will yet. And that's where I think the bigger size of the opportunity is.
And so on that point, go ahead, Bella, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we also need to remember, when we look to behavioral science, that there's something called market failure. And I think that's one of the main reasons why you create associations like this. One of the concerns I have as a behavioral scientist and working applied is that the market itself, even though the tide is rising, is the market might just go away if people don't act responsible, for instance. And there are certain methodologies in behavioral science that you would like to follow ethical guidelines as well. So you can actually have a situation where you have good behavioral science working with everything from observational studies, in-depth data analysis, and so on. And then you might have somebody coming in and saying, like, I can do the same. I'm just going to do a survey or something like that. And this means that behavioral science, for the person standing outside commissioning behavioral science work, they will not be able to see what is good quality and what is bad quality, what adheres to ethical guidelines, what does not adhere to ethical guidelines. And that means that it is, as in medicine and everything else, you will have people coming in and they will dodge these standards because it's cheaper or it's faster to not do the work in a proper way. And this both means, on the one hand, that we're not guaranteed by the market forces that good quality will win out on the one hand. And on the other hand, there's also this responsibility because behavioral science, of course, it's about people's behavior. So you are very often you go quite close to people's everyday behavior. And this means that we can get involved, if we are not careful, in some very embarrassing things, or as a field, where suddenly people who have invested years and years and years in developing the skills and working according to the standards in behavioral science will suddenly be undercut by people who, they're doing behavioral science today. Yesterday they did marketing, and tomorrow they will do co-creation workshops of something, right?
There's your market for lemons. And another reason why the Global Association of Applied Behavioural Scientists has actually been set up. I think at this stage we're probably not the solution to those problems that you rightly set out, Hele. But we do aim, I think, to be part of a set of solutions to that challenge. So at least those people that are doing it authentically and have a legitimacy have a stamp of approval of sorts to be able to say to those people that are commissioning these type of services, hey, look, I do come with some credibility, some experience. That's an important part of what the organisation has actually been set up to do. But you're exactly right. But that goes back to the creation of mankind. Any opportunity that someone else can, think, oh, I'll have some of that. Of course, yeah, they're going to take whatever shortcuts they can to exploit that situation for their own benefit.
Yeah, it reminds me of like there's medical malpractice, and maybe we need to start thinking about behavioral malpractice, which we've seen plenty of examples in the last 5 to 10 years, and I think mostly of like the big tech giants and social media players. I think if we had a GAABS 10 years ago, maybe those events wouldn't have happened, or maybe they wouldn't have been so egregious in their acting. It's hard to say. Humans are humans, but either way, it obviously demands for some sort of oversight and regulation. Sorry, Nuala, you were going to say.
Yeah, I suppose just building on that, I think one group that will benefit particularly from GAABS and the opportunity that's out there is quite possibly maybe the smaller units within the larger firms. I think we have a spectrum of members, which will be smaller individual practitioners to the really large established associate companies. And I think the fact that we have this group now that will cater to that, I think is tremendous, and it will give a much greater identity to smaller behavioral science units or individuals operating either within large firms or independently. So I think that will help to fuel the opportunity, and again, maybe counteract some of those, maybe ethical concerns that exist.
So let's round out our conversation here with a rapid fire, if you guys don't mind. So I'm just going to go in the order of the faces on my screen here. So the question is, and 30 seconds, okay? Don't go on some sort of rant here. Let's keep it short and succinct. So question is, looking ahead, what contribution would you like to see GAABS make to the industry? And that first to Torben.
Thank you. I
You're welcome.
very much hope we continue to really connect the practitioners who are serious about the correct ethical and technical application of behavioral science in the field across the globe. We just launched this week, and it was a wonderful launch and a wonderful feedback to see so many people sharing their interest in this initiative, showing that they want to be part as an individual practitioner, as a specialized team inside a non-behavioral science organization, or as a standalone behavioral science consultancy, and also from the various clients and partners that commission work in behavioral science that said, well, thank you for setting this up, rolling this out on such a broad scale, because it allows us to navigate the market much better. And I hope along these lines, we're able to sort of stimulate the conversation and have a lot of fun together. We're 5 people from 5 different countries and 5 different setups today, just in this call. We hope we're hundreds in the years to come.
It was very nice, but you're over time, Torben, but that's okay. We'll let that slide.
Really? Give me some slack. Thank you.
So, Steve, question to you. Same question.
Okay,
Same
I'll
time.
try to be quicker then. I think we should. I'd like us to be the standard bearer of what good applied behavioral science is, and what people that commission behavioral science should expect. I'm not entirely convinced that if we'd have existed 10 years ago, the Facebook, Cambridge Analytica stuff wouldn't have happened. I think it probably still would have. But if we set a standard and we uphold our own selves to that standard, I think that sets a good precedent. And if we can do that in GAABS and generate some several hundred continuing numbers of members, principally working in the private sector, I think that's us making a very good and valid contribution to our discipline.
Good stuff. And Pele?
Well, 2 things. One of them being what Steve already said, creating some kind of a stamp that ensures that people adhere to good norms of practice, I think is extremely important to protect the field. So that's one thing. The other thing being that one of the things I've kind of enjoy very much about applied behavioral scientists, they seem to be much more fun than other people and drink nice beers and and usually, my wife is tired of listening to me talking about behavioral science. So basically making friends. I think that's the reason I'm here.
Fantastic.
I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. And
Our first birthday party sounds like it's going to be fun then, Pele.
Yeah.
And Nuala, you have the hardest job, because now you have to come up with something that's unique and that the other three haven't said.
Well, we should have gone with the fun first, I reckon. But I suppose thinking about it, I suppose what I would like, if possible, I would love to see more aligned partnerships of interested groups, but basically groups who want to achieve something in fields that we haven't looked at before. So, and I talk about things like whistleblowing, genocide, domestic abuse, prison reform, and I'm talking about the big social complex problems. And the reason I think that where I'd like GAABS to play a role, if at all possible, is the private sector. They're the clients of the GAABS members. They are the GAABS members. And I think if we can collectively influence the corporations and the companies through that membership to have a greater voice, I think it'll make a real difference long term. So for me, it's that social justice and piece where I think behavioural science has a massive opportunity, and we're only scratching the surface there. Great.
Well, you did it. You said something really unique and rather insightful, Nuala. Thank you for that. And if I may turn the question over to myself as the host and moderator of this discussion, what I hope it does, of course, in addition to everything that you guys already mentioned, is advance our understanding of human behavior. I think that's maybe like a natural byproduct of regulating this field. I think we have a lot. No, I don't think I know. We have a lot of work to do in understanding human behavior and behavior change, and solving for, as you said, Nuala, some of these just thorny issues that seem to be getting worse these days than better. And so I think having an association like this aligns professionals of behavioral science to get us all on the same page, so that we can, because ultimately we're striving for the same thing, which is understanding and thereby changing human behavior for the better, or for the good, as you will. Well, where can we direct listeners if they want to check us out and learn more? Steve, can you give some sort of maybe a website of some?
Yeah, website is easy. www.gaabs.org. It's GAABS.org. Also, we're on LinkedIn, Twitter, and all across social media. You might have seen us during this week already, and you might see more of us coming over the next weeks and months. And yeah, just reach out, start a conversation, join the conversation, and let us know what GAABS can do for you and how you can be active within GAABS.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming on the show. This was a real treat. I was excited for this one. I think we were all excited for this one. And as Torben said, listeners, reach out to myself or email the show, or reach out to any of these fine members here, and we'd love to continue the conversation. So to the four of you for now, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Nick here once more. A final farewell note before ending. All the show notes, links to papers, resources, and materials mentioned in the episode can be found on the BS podcast page of The Behaviorist, where you can find all episodes and lots of other interesting and easy to apply sciencey stuff. Just go to www.behaviorist.biz/BS podcast. The show is edited and co-produced by Laura Christine and Noelle Rain, and all visual artwork, banners, and animated GIFs are created by the talented Iris Deng of dengit.org. That's DENGIT.org. Check it out. And lastly, if you'd like to join me in the mission of spreading the good BS word, remember to rate and review the show on iTunes. A lot of work goes into these episodes, and a little love would go a long way. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, remember, keep your facts ugly and your hypotheses beautiful.